Hi there, this is Eshu. I'm the abbot here at Zenwest Buddhist Society. This Living Zen-podcast is just one of the many resources we've created at Zenwest to make Zen practice and training more available and accessible to people all over the world. Instructional videos, printable resources, and much, much more are also available on our website at www.zenwest.ca. If you're a regular listener, I'd love to hear from you. So please drop me an email at office@zenwest.ca and let me know who you are, how you got started, and what brought you to Zen. Everything we make available in person and online at Zenwest is only possible because of the support of our members and associates, people like you. If the efforts of our community are making a difference in your life, I'd like to invite you to show your support and take part in making it happen by becoming an associate or member of the Zenwest Sangha. You can do this by clicking the Join Us tab on our website at www.zenwest.ca. Thank you for your support, and thanks for listening. Continuing with the Gateless Barrier, case 36, Wuzu's meeting someone accomplished in the Tao. Wuzu said, "When you meet someone accomplished in the Tao on the road, do not make your greeting with words or with silence. How will you make your greeting?" Wu Men says, "If you become intimate with this matter, you are certainly to be warmly congratulated. If it is not yet clear, then you must be alert to every single thing." Wu Men's verse says, "Meeting someone accomplished in the Tao on the road, don't make your greeting with words or with silence. A punch in the jaw. If you want to realize, just realize." Good morning, everybody. It's been, I think, 87 years since the last time I gave a talk. Feels like it, anyway. I've spent the last 2 days in a workshop called The Sacred Art of Living and Dying. This is a part of, well, it just sort of, it was the fourth unit of a 4-unit sequence that is usually done over 2 years. So I got like the last unit. And so I was with, 100 people who have, most 90% of them or more maybe, had all been through the whole thing for 2 years. And then I was coming in. In fact, this program was actually sort of started by the Victoria Hospice Spiritual Care Coordinator two before me. They didn't make it. But the course did, which is great. And so I sort of parachuted into this, and it was a great way actually to meet a lot of the people there, because I've worked only one day at the hospice so far. And of course, all the nurses are nursing and all the counselors are counseling, and everyone's kind of busy. So this was a really great way to actually get to know some people at the hospice. Anyways, the course was about transforming spiritual pain, which is according to the sort of philosophy of this program, it's sort of a pain or an angst or a type of suffering that underlies all suffering. And so when it comes to illness, or particularly the end of life, there's a lot of other kind of pain going on. There's mental pain, and there's emotional pain, and there's physical pain, lots of physical pain. And so talking to some nurses about it, they were saying that, you can do certain things for certain kinds of pain, but what happens when you've given the person all the drugs you can, and you've sort of eliminated all of the sort of movable components that would cause pain, and yet this person is still suffering. And so this is the idea of that there's this, underneath all of that, there's a spiritual pain that is untreated or unaddressed, and it's very difficult to address from a medical model or from an external model. You've actually got to sort of address that. And so I'm really learning a lot about hospice, end-of-life care in a short period of time. But really, one of the things that I've realized over the course of this weekend is, all of this talk about Zen practice being an investigation of this great matter of life and death is real. And this is why when we're on a Tuesday night or someone is coming in to do meditation for the first time, I'm always really concerned. I don't know if that's the right word, but sort of apprehensive, maybe, when we're in a tea circle and someone says, I'm coming to relax, or I'm coming to find a place where I can sort of get away from the busyness of life. And as you know, it concerns me because this is really not my experience of Zen practice. And I imagine if you've come to Zen practice for any period of time, which everyone in this room has, you find out pretty quickly that it's not a very good, if you're looking for an escape, a bottle of bourbon and a hot tub might be a better deal, because this is sort of like the opposite. It's a stepping into. And I think that the idea of having it be a retreat or be a way of getting away, it works for a little while. But it's sort of like, in a lot of ways, the metaphor of our hermitage cabin is a great metaphor. The number of people I talk to about what we've built here, this hermitage cabin, when you talk about it with them on the surface, they get really sort of excited and inspired. They say, "Oh, what a great idea that is! I'd love to just, drop out and get away from all the busy things in my life. I'd like to go there and just, have nothing to do and just relax." And I think that we often think that way about our lives and how busy they are. But the reality is that kind of practice, that kind of hermitage practice, that genuine retreat practice, is actually extremely difficult, because all of those things we think of as being little niggles and drains on our energy and busyness and all that kind of stuff, it all is very generous. It's all very kind to us, because it's all these very small and gentle and subtle distractions from our fundamental questions, our fundamental difficulties, our fundamental discomforts. And we have so many distractions in the world that we don't even realize that that's what they're doing. We think, I choose them, and they're fun, and they're pleasant, and they're necessities, and they're all these different kinds of things. But the reality is, when we come to a time where we're going to let them go, or let them drop away. Everything that we haven't been looking at, our internal world, comes up. And this is what intensive Zen practice is aimed at, is creating this space where we sort of turn off all of the distracting noises and the distracting thoughts. We create a structure where we can come into it where we don't have to worry about anything. If you're the Tenzo, even if you're the Tenzo, you worry about one thing. I remember when I was young doing Zen practice in my early 20s, and I would be asked to do Tenzo either at sessions here with the Zen Center Vancouver, or doing sessions at Mount Baldy when I was down there doing shoten or being involved in the kitchen with 40 or 50 session participants. And I was like, oh my God, this is like the hardest thing ever. And sorting through the food and trying to calculate how much rice to cook, and particularly at Mount Baldy, sort of like how long you had to cook something because you're at 6,500 feet and water boils at it's like this whole physical, chemical calculation process. Anyway, so really complex and difficult, and oh my God, so difficult. And then I remember a number of years later, after having a child, or maybe even two, I think it was just after the first child, going down to Mount Baldy and doing Tenzoing there again, and going, this is so easy. All I have to worry about is the food. I'm not worried if a kid is climbing out a window or climbing up on the stove, or I'm not worried if my wife's angry at me, or if a bunch of stuff isn't getting done. It's like my whole job is just doing food. Wow, what a vacation. So each thing that we do in the Zendo, even if we have a role, one of the practices that we really have to do, and it's very difficult as lay people or people living in a lay world, not in that sort of long-term monastic environment, to really come in the front door and really take advantage of that, to really be able to just drop the stuff that's outside and just engage with that one single thing. That's the one side. That's the nice, oh good, we get to dump everything off. But whether we're in a hermitage, or whether we're the Tenzo, or whether we're the Jigajitsu, or whether we're just a person whose only responsibility is just to follow the form and sit, it's like there's no escaping your stuff. It's there. And so, especially in a retreat, you watch your mind, and in the absence of external stuff to distract ourselves from what's going on, we have this very rich resource to distract ourselves from our own pain and our own trauma and our own history and our own unfinished business right on board. It's like, who needs Netflix? If you've ever done a session, I mean, it's like, I don't know, mine are like range between the porno channel and the action adventure channel to reruns of Lord of the Rings to Harry Potter marathons, and somewhere in there maybe there's a little bit of looking at my own shit that comes up every once in a while. But the reality is mostly it's just channel surfing there. I mean, and it's not even like it's like somebody else has the remote control almost. It's like my little protective ego self has the remote control, and every time things get a little bit difficult, or I start to really look at something that's difficult, it's like, let's see what's on. It turns the channel. Oh, let's watch this again. And after years of doing Zen practice, it starts to get to the point where as I sit during sesshin, I start to say, we've seen this one. We've seen like a lot of this one, and it's kind of boring. And I used to really try to fight it. I used to really try to muscle it back to where, I was really, just on my stuff all the time. But what I found is that actually this just stirs more stuff. And so my practice now is just to allow this stuff to come and know, not engaging in it, not indulging in it, not going like, I love this one. It happens sometimes, but generally you just kind of let it happen, not putting any energy into it, either to hold on to it or to fight it away. And eventually it sort of settles down. What I've found over the past few years is that's oftentimes the very early part of a sesshin is a lot of that stuff. And then as we cross into sort of the middle section or even the later section, the practice is so powerful. Just the form of practice, I find the form and the basis of practice and koans in particular is so powerful that there are times when I call it, when I'm talking about it, I call it the Teflon mind, which is like, I find that middle point to sort of later points in sesshin, I'm kind of on task all the time. And sometimes I look for a break. I say, oh God, I wonder what's on the porno channel or something like this. And I try to think about something other than what's going on. And I can't hold it. It's like the energy isn't there. So I come up with something really great, and then I'll hear something. I'll hear a bird or a plane if I'm at Genjo's, and it's gone. And there I am again in my difficulty in just. And when I talk about difficulty or spiritual pain, or sometimes there's a very linear understanding to it. But a lot of the time, it's not that. It's a body feeling, or it's an overwhelming emotion of grief or anger or anxiety. But I've practiced for a long time, and so I know, just like the mental distractions, that these things come up and these things exist for a time and then they pass. And the way that I really look at them is that like they're spirits, they're ghosts, my own ghosts, the ghosts of my past. And like the hungry ghost ceremony that we do, our tendency with ghosts is always to like run screaming away as fast as we can, or to avoid it or hold the door. And all that those ghosts want and need is to be heard, to be felt, to be seen, to be embraced. And so my practice now, when these things come up, when the sensation comes up, in the beginning I used to, it was always, when this stuff comes up, we immediately say, where's this coming from? And is this about what happened to me when I was a child? And sometimes that can be important. And if that's your sort of disposition, that's okay. You can do that. But what you find is that the linear mind sort of runs out of steam far before the sort of embodied angst sort of does. And there comes a point where you can't make any connection. You can't make a connection honestly to the external stimuli that are happening and the feelings that you're feeling, or the physical sensations that you're feeling. And you're not sure about the connection, where it's coming from or how this is happening. And frankly, I really have come to feel like it's not even important. Our job is to just surrender, to stop fighting that experience and to just allow ourselves to do it. I think a big part of the resistance, or a big part of the difficulty, is that when we have feelings that are difficult and unpleasant, grief, fear, anxiety, sometimes love, sometimes openness, sometimes joy, are also can be experienced as unpleasant. For me personally, like love, like a real sort of unconditional love, the love of a mother to a child, a newborn child, is something that I find profoundly uncomfortable. It feels so vulnerable, and it feels so unbounded that it makes me feel lost or vulnerable and fragile. And so for me, sometimes I just look at a flower or I hear a sound, and that feeling of like, this comes up. And on the one hand, it's wonderful and it's boundless. But there's another part of me that goes, dangerous! This is dangerous. And I think my belief is that, this comes from my love of my own mother, and that unconditional love and losing that relationship. And so there's fear around it. But when it comes up in practice, my practice is to let that come up and to be with all of that, the vulnerability and the joy and the anxiety and the fear, everything. Just be with it, to develop it. And what has to happen in order to do that, what has to happen for us to be with any of those feelings, to be with any of that stuff that comes up, is that we have to let go of the part of ourselves, the aspect of our I am selves, our egos, that has an agenda, or that has a plan, or that says the shoulds. We should be feeling like this, or we shouldn't be feeling like that, or this is what should be happening now, or I don't want that to happen now, or any of those things. And to talk in Zen terms, what we're talking about here is death. Because that self that exerts itself like that is, it's who we think we are. Who we think we are, who we think we should be, and who we think everything else and what everything else is. And when that stuff comes up, our general tendency is to just avoid it, is to just distract ourselves with something else so we don't have to feel it. And what we do when we're doing Zen practice is we lock ourselves into this position physically and environmentally. There's a whole lot of collaborative support / pressure for us to just sit in that, right? Like, if we were sitting at home, and I think everybody who's sat at home has found that, it's really hard when the shit comes up and you're sitting on your own at home to just sit in it, because you don't have a group of people around you, you don't have the rules of the form, you don't have, all the restrictions that keep you there. So oftentimes you go, well, that's good for today, and you get up and you just go about your day. But in this form, bang, there we are in it. And maybe we've gone away for a week, or we've set our life up in such a way that this is what we're here for. And as we practice more and more, we can really recognize this is what we're doing. So one of the things that came up in the workshop yesterday was this idea that you've got to die before you die. And for me, this really resonated, because Zen, as I said, is always talking about this, the great matter of life and death. And awakening, realization, is often called the great death. And all of the koans, there's so many koans that talk about swords and precipices and death, dying. And this is why. Because over and over again, we come up against this sort of boundary, what Wumen calls this gateless gate. There's a boundary, and it's between hanging on to the self as we know it and hanging on to the world as we know it, this differentiated, I am, me, self. And then on the other side of the gate is the integrated, complete realization that all things in this vast cosmos arise and dissolve together. And there's no way that you can take your nice, neatly packaged I am self through that barrier. So this thing that we're doing all the time, this way that we practice, is the way of birth and death, of arising as a self and allowing that self to dissolve. The activity of prostration that we do, it's not an obeisance thing, it's not a you're better than me thing. It is a physical manifestation of the activity that we have to do every moment of every day, which is we have to dissolve, we have to allow this self that we've become attached to and built and everything like that to melt, to dissolve away and to die. And what comes afterwards is a birth. That's all that can happen, is that there's a new self that arises. And it's wonderful, and we can love it, or we can not care so much about it, or we can, think it's beautiful, or we can not so wonderful. But all that stuff is just opinion, and in the next moment, again, it dies. Why do we do this, I guess? Well, more and more what I'm seeing is that a lot of people don't. And this is one of the things that I really spent a lot of time reflecting on this weekend, is just how grateful I am that there is a group of people that I know, that I'm involved with, that do this on a regular basis in what I think is actually a fairly profound way. And, it was a great check for me, because it's always the case that, what we have at home becomes normal. And so we kind of think, everybody does this stuff. Everybody's looking at life and death and all that kind of stuff. But what I realized this weekend is it isn't so. It's not so. One of the things that I was really surprised to learn is that the average stay at hospice has moved really significantly from what was 10 or 15, 20 years ago, 3 or 4 months. The average stay in hospice is 8 days. So people only get into the hospice now when there are so-called actively dying. And this is where all of the resources come to bear. I mean, a person can be enrolled in hospice for years, but the actual sort of on the unit is 8 days. And so when a person arrives at that place, it's very difficult to be doing anything but managing symptoms, physical symptoms, really. Because if you haven't been practicing dying, if you haven't been looking at how to get underneath your physical pain and your mental pain and your emotional pain and down to that level of sort of like existential angst, and you haven't been practicing how to be with that, and you haven't been practicing how to die moment to moment, your whole life, or any part of your life, then 8 days, the last 8 days of your life is way too busy. It's like you got physical pain going on. You may not even be conscious. So, this practice that we're engaging in, and we use this term practice all the time, and I'm like, this weekend I kind of laughed because I was like, oh, this is what we're practicing for. Dying. Over and over again we engage in this practice of dying, so that when this is all optional. This is all volunteer dying. We show up every day and we say, oh, I'll put on my dying clothes and we'll go to the zendo and we'll listen to the dying bells and we'll do all that and we'll just die. And you have some choice. And that's a wonderful thing. And the difficulty is the death, like body death, is not voluntary. It's like the session that everybody has to go to. And some people decide that they better get used to that. They better start practicing to go to sesshin beforehand. And some people do everything they can to pretend that there is no sesshin. And they have a wonderful whole world that helps them to say, oh, no, do this instead of sesshin. Go to Hawaii and go to, do this, play some video games. Much better way to spend a weekend. But in the end, it's just like, can you imagine? It's like the great Rohatsu, right? Where it's like eventually this big monk comes to your door and says, it's time for Rohatsu, and grabs you and puts you on the boat and takes you. And in that environment, that's very much what it's like. If a person is really has not taken the time to prepare themselves in any way for the event of their death, it really is like that. It's like, but what about my iPhone? And what about my TV? And what about my loved ones? And what about my stuff? And what about and this is such a foreign and frightening and taxing and terrifying experience. And that's just the first part of like, oh, all this stuff is dropping away. And then in the quiet, all of the demons, all of the old stuff is there. And you say, oh my, this is a whole lifetime of stuff. How will I ever manage it? And that's a very sad thing, I think, a very difficult and painful thing for the person, but also for everybody who cares about that person, because it's seen, it's experienced. We share that with a person. So I guess I should talk about this koan and how it relates. But it completely relates. Because this, the thing that I most like about this case is, I like in many cases, and also in the record of Rinzai, is when they use the Taoist term Tao, way. And I think it's particularly relevant. It was relevant at that time in China where they're using this. The Tao was a word that they used as a synonym for Dharma, the Buddhists. But it was also a bridging term because the sort of native, indigenous sort of spirituality of China was Taoist. And so it was a word that you could use to link these people of two traditions, which weren't at loggerheads by any means. They were quite aligned, and they could nod. And I think this is also a great way to understand when we're practicing in North America, where we've got Jews and Christians and Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus and Jains and Wiccans and atheists and we've got this endless panoply of traditions and non-traditions. And so the question is, when you meet someone accomplished in the Tao on the road, do not make your greeting with words or with silence. How will you make your greeting? And what my own experience is in working with people of different faith traditions or of no faith tradition, is that I have seen and met and shared tea with and innumerable interactions with people who are, I would say, profoundly of the way, who I don't understand their tradition or how they've gone about doing it. But this great matter has come up, not just once, but over and over and over again in their lives. Carson, go lay down. And upon meeting them, or upon sitting with them, or upon sharing space with them, a word doesn't need to be spoken. Watching how they interact with objects and with people in relationship, no words need to be shared to recognize that is a person of the way, some way. Master Rinzai has a quote in the Rinzai record that's very similar to this, where it's like, if you meet a person of the way on the road, the last thing you should talk about is the way. It's like, if you recognize that in a person, it's such a waste of time to talk about religion. It's like, isn't it a beautiful sunset? I mean, even that's too much. It can just be a smile, or a nod, or just a presencing, just being fully with that person. So the question is, when you meet someone accomplished in the Tao on the road, do not make your greeting with words or silence. How will you make your greeting? Wu Men says, if you become intimate with this matter, you are certainly to be warmly congratulated. If it is not yet clear, then you must be alert to every single thing. This sounds like some kind of instruction. If you're able to have this capacity, if you're able to be able to recognize somebody who is accomplished in the way, you should shake your hand. Oh, congratulations, very good. And if not, you should just be alert to every single thing. But this is just simply our practice. All Wu Men is saying is, if that hasn't come yet, just keep going. Become accomplished in the way. You've got to continue doing this practice of being born and dying over and over and over again. That's it. It's not a new special instruction. Oh, now, I don't know what you've been doing before, but now you need to pay attention to everything. And recognize that everything in this cosmos is paying attention. All you have to do is kind of join it. There's been many times where I've been hiking and I'm with Carson and I'm processing something and I start to talk to myself. And I walk through the cedar grove a lot, and there's a lot of really big cedars there. And then sometimes I get to a point where I'm suddenly like, I can almost feel the tree saying, "Shut up." And I say, "Oh, sorry." Paying attention. Meeting someone accomplished in the Tao on the road, don't make your greeting with words or with silence. So this is something, this is a koan, where someone would say, if you meet someone accomplished in the Tao on the road, how do you make your greeting? without using words, and without being silent. Without using words means without coming from the space of separation, without coming from the ego self, without coming from you and me. Is there no sound? Is there no words? There are no words of I. A punch in the jaw, Wu Men says. A punch in the jaw. This realization, he's talking about the incident or the happening or the occurrence of realization. And it seems like it's always a shock. And there are cases in the Mulan Kan and in the Zen sort of stories where there's been a real shock, like a trauma. People's legs being broken, people's noses being twisted, all kinds of things. But even if it's a chicken, the sound of a chicken, or if it's the sound of a bird singing, or it's a cool breeze, or it's watching the trees sway, or a wonderful sunset, that immersion, that realization, that slipping into the dissolution, it's always a shock. It's never like, oh, this. It's always like, wow. What's been spoken about, what's been taught, this fundamental oneness, is not just a concept. I get it. If you want to realize, the last line in this is, if you want to realize, just realize. And this is so easy for Wu Men to say. Zen, this realization, this awakening, it's nothing special, in the sense that when we're able to let go, of our fixation with what we think we should be, or what we think other people and other things are, when we allow ourselves to expand into that space of unconditional love, like I was talking about, where we confront the difficulty with that, the fear of that, the avoidance of that, and we just say enough. Let go and allow our hearts to expand to the point where we contain all things in this vast cosmos. Maybe we can only experience that, sustain that for a breath, a moment. But we're not adding something. And I think that's one of the things that we often think, is that awakening, realization, Buddha nature, however we want to express it, is something that we have to, work really hard to cultivate and develop, and all of that kind of stuff. We have to fluff it up somehow so that it overflows, and then, we get it. But awakening, realization, is not an additive process. The Buddha taught that already we're complete. Already this realization, this awakening, is present in us. It's present in the stones. It's present in the trees. It's present in the air that we breathe. But we are blind to it. We have this idea of a self that says, this is what we are, and that's what we are. That's all that we are. And that's what that is, and that's all that that is. It's discriminating mind cuts this whole fabric up into little bitty pieces. And that's useful. It allows us to walk through the world and experience other things and know a bus from a bicycle and all those kinds of things. But it's a functional tool that isn't necessarily rooted in the deepest reality of this cosmos. Genjo often says, we're all made up of stardust. This is true. You and me and everything in this cosmos is just these infinitely small bits of stuff that have conglomerated together for relatively an infinitely small amount of time before they all disconnect and go in different directions to reconnect elsewhere. All we have to do is really deeply realize that this is so. There's nothing added. It's a process of letting go, dying, allowing the idea that we're something, that we're fixed and permanent and separate, to die. When we don't pick up that idea, when we don't fixate that idea, when we're not holding that as our absolute truth, then this broader reality, this broader spaciousness, this broader relationship, this broader interconnectedness and depth arises of its own accord. You don't need to do anything. This is why Linji uses this phrase, buji, having nothing to do. We think, enlightenment and practice and all this stuff is something I've got to do. But already that activity, birth and death, is happening. Whether you like it or not, at a rate that is not in your control, it's happening all around you, all the time. Simultaneously, things are being born and destroyed every microsecond. And what we do is we spend a huge amount of time telling ourselves that it's not happening, pretending that it may be happening over there, but it's not happening to me, or there's an I somewhere that evades this rule that seems to apply to everything and everyone else. And so this practice, buji, this practice of Zen, this practice of dying, is just allowing that delusion, that fundamental confusion, to rest, letting go of the energy that we use to uphold that story, and just allowing ourselves to rest in the activity that's unfolding around us all the time. Okay, that's plenty long. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to the Living Zen podcast. If you follow Living Zen through iTunes, I would very much appreciate it if you would take a moment to let me know what you think about it by rating or reviewing the podcast, so that new listeners can also hear what you have to say. Thank you for your time and for your support.